Well, I think we've given people time to join. One announcement we have, it looks like from what we can see, the Q&A module is having challenges for whatever reason. So as a plan B, if during the webinar, if you have questions, you can email me. That's jason.russell, two S's, two L's, at SQLsolutionsGroup.com. And then as Rich pauses from time to time to check if there are questions, I can relay those to him. So apologize for that glitch. Uh, didn't expect that, of course. But thank you for being here. Rich Benner is joining us from Derbyshire, England. He went all the way from there to Seattle last month for the past summit. And we're looking forward to having his firsthand report. So with that, I will turn it over to him.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, welcome everybody to a retrospective of Past Summit 2024. It was my first time attending Summit. It's not my first SQL conference, but it's my first time at Summit. And yeah, it was interesting. It was good to meet a lot of you. Hello, Randy. Randy's
Hey, sorry about that. I was on another call and went long.
No problem.
So happy to be here.
Yeah, welcome. Yeah, I'm just doing a little introduction. So yeah, my name's Rich. I'm one of the consultants here at SSG. Like Jason mentioned, I'm based in the UK. Been a DBA for 16 years now in various flavors. And spoke at Past Summit for the first time this year, which was nice. Randy, do you want to do a quick intro?
Sure. So I think likely most that have attended our webinars know me. I'm Randy Knight. I'm the founder and principal consultant, CEO, CTO, chief bottle washer, whatever you want to call me for SSG. I've been doing this for about 3 decades now, and started SSG in 2010. Frequent participant in community events. I've spoken at Summit many times. This year, I actually was only there for 1 day on Wednesday, so I didn't submit to speak because I had a conflict. I had to fly out Thursday morning, but so it was kind of a whirlwind, and so I definitely saw a lot of people that was fun to connect with that I hadn't seen in a long time, and met new people, but missed a lot of people too because it was just only a day. Obviously, it was great hosting Rich a little bit over here in the colonies, and over the weekend went and did some fun stuff. Those who know me know that I live in Seattle now, but I'm from, or not from, but I lived in Texas for a long time and took up barbecue. So we made some good authentic Texas chili, and had our Brit friend over for some of that. So he managed to survive that. So yeah, it was.
You were very kind on the spice level as well.
I was.
Yeah, you were gentle.
So yeah, it was good to be there again. It was great that Rich was able to speak the first time. Unfortunately, both of his sessions were on the days that I wasn't there, but yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah, and there was some fun announcements there as well. We will be talking about an announcement that wasn't made at Summit that Microsoft saved till Ignite. But let's go through well, a little bit about SSG. I mean, if you're here, you know who we are. Full stack SQL Server consultancy. We do remote DBA services, health checks, coaching. So you know where we are if you need anything from us. So go through some of the headlines at Summit. We'll talk about a few of these a little bit more. The keynote by Microsoft on Wednesday was announcing Management Studio 21. I don't know if you got this feeling from it, Randy, but it felt very AI and Copilot to me this year at Summit. There was a lot of pushing AI, including having Copilot embedded in Management Studio.
For sure. One of the things that I actually was even talking with someone who works for Microsoft now, an old friend, and said, for the last, what, at least 5 years, maybe even longer at this point, everything at Microsoft has had to have Azure in the name, right? And she was like, now it's Copilot. You have to name it Copilot in order. So it's
Yeah.
definitely, AI Copilot is the Microsoft focus. So yeah, that was definitely the flavor that I got as well.
Yeah. And we get those flavors every year out of it, of different types, but yeah, it felt very AI. So yeah, they announced Management Studio. We'll talk about it a bit more. It basically has it's a newer version um, for the newer versions of SQL Server with a few new features. We'll go through those. Um, they announced some stuff for Azure Managed Instance, so bidirectional disaster recovery. And by that, we'll talk about it a bit more actually in a minute. And then a new version, a new next generation of service tier for managed instance. Azure SQL DB, you'll see vector support come up a lot in these, but that is communication with AI models and things like that. And they've made some enhancements in hyperscale as well. And like I mentioned, one thing we didn't see at Summit was SQL Server 2025, which Microsoft announced at Ignite conference, which was 2 weeks later. That was towards the end of November. But we couldn't have a webinar and not talk about the new version of SQL Server that's been announced. So we'll go through those. So Management Studio 21. Basically, they've reworked it. It's based on Visual Studio now, not the old 32-bit version of Management Studio that it used to be. You could download it. It's in public preview. I've actually got a version download we can have a look at in a minute. But yeah, they've embedded Copilot in it. They've changed a lot of the search functionality. They've made it a bit cleaner, and they've added a dark mode. But it's not perfect yet. It's still in preview. But yeah, it's an easy switch to make, and a lot of people like dark mode. So let's just go and look at that to start with. Let's go to my instance. So this is, and I'll launch it from scratch. So Management Studio 21 here. New little splash screen when it wants to load. And we're in. The same as we've seen before. I'm just going to connect to my local little test server here. So very similar to before. Some things you'll notice up here, there's quite a lot of stuff that they've removed, things like the MDX query buttons and things that we rarely use. You can add them back in, but they've taken them off as standard. One of the more interesting things for me is the search function here. So they've got code or feature search. If you've got multiple windows open, so let me go and open a couple of store procedures in different tabs. Doesn't matter what they are. We'll just have them open. This one here has this text in it. So what you can do with the code search is it'll open a search. You can search for any code I've got open that has this text in it, and then you can double click on it and it will take you to the correct tab. So those tab hoarders of you out there, of us, I can't claim innocence. You can easily search through your code, which is nice. You can search through, you can do things like searching, if you put an F and a colon, you can search for files. You can, yeah, search for just for text. So it's quite useful. The more interesting thing is the feature search. So if you want to do something like, for example, dark mode, you type in dark and it doesn't find it. Let's try that again. That's very interesting.
Maybe
it was
themes.
working.
There
Well,
was something about themes.
yeah, so you've got blue theme, I don't know why dark has disappeared,
More themes, yeah.
but
That's
you can double
interesting.
click it and change the theme. I definitely had it in dark mode earlier, which is, yeah, it's still in preview. So I've gone to blue, and then yeah, I had light mode as well. That's interesting that it's done that. But yeah, I mean, it's a quick, simple change to change your modes. A few other things they've done is your query tabs here. I may have to restart Management Studio for this, but you can place them on the left, for example. Oh no, it did work. So instead of having your tabs across the top, you can have them down the left, and then you can flip that up to the right as well, wherever you prefer. You can group stuff based upon GitHub repos, and then you can color stuff by the project it's in, or you could give some regex in there, just for some automatic grouping. It's just a nice to have, especially if you've got a big estate of SQL Server. Have you had a chance to play with 21 yet, Randy?
I have not.
Yeah, I know it's still in preview, but
yeah.
It also makes Git integration much easier. It just works a bit better. I've cloned a couple
I
of
think honestly,
repos
I think probably to me the most interesting part of this release is that it is an actual Visual Studio shell.
Mhm.
So a lot of those things that we've had in Visual Studio will have, right?
Mhm.
I'm cautiously optimistic about performance because SSMS had gotten to the point where, just loading it would take forever, right? So hopefully,
Agreed.
I'm hopeful that the Visual Studio means it's kind of a new code base. So
Yeah.
a lot of that mess will be cleaned up. So
I think behind the scenes they must have. So they brought out Azure Data Studio, right, which was
yep.
another Visual Studio shell, but that didn't do
Yeah,
everything that
but
Management Studio
ADS is
did.
based upon Visual Studio Code, right? Which is
Yeah.
totally different, right? That's the reason it's so fast. It's JavaScript or TypeScript, right? Like it's the
Mhm.
whole thing is completely different. But it has some limitations that like a lot of the features and things that we're used to in SSMS that you just can't build in ADS. So
Yeah.
um,
I was worried that Microsoft were going to try and push us all to ADS.
They were.
Um,
They were. And
yeah.
I think this is a nod to like that's really not working for everybody, right? So, the Git integration and the just, the extensions, right? I don't know, you're probably going to talk about that, but that's one of the coolest things about ADS, right? Is that, there's all these extensions that you can add and that you can build your own extensions and so forth. And so the fact that they kind of have that, you've always had plugins for SSMS, but they were pretty hardcore. So
Mhm.
I think for me, the stuff I'm most excited about this probably isn't like, oh, look how cool it is today, but that it feels like they've laid the groundwork for a new SSMS that I think will be more modern and extensible and more what we're looking for in modern IDEs. So that's my
Yeah,
tip.
yeah, it's a lot more customizable. Yeah, like you say, a lot more flexible
Yep.
than yeah, the old manager did feel a bit restrictive at times for
Yep.
some of the interesting and fun stuff. But yeah, like you mentioned, we're in the extension stuff here, and you can add extensions, you can customize everything very easily. If you do a lot in Query Designer or God forbid XML, you can just add the toolbars back in, and individual commands as well. So yeah, it's definitely interesting. Um, yeah, it's frustrating that Ignite was so close to pass Summit, or I think they'd have announced it there. The new version of SQL Server. But yeah, a new version of Management Studio is always going to be nice. So, like I mentioned, this is in public preview. You can download it. It is still preview, so it's not perfect. But if you want to go and download Management Studio 21 and play with it, you absolutely can. It's obviously backward compatible as well with previous versions of SQL Server, so you don't need to wait for SQL Server 25 to use it. You can just start using it straight away. Okay. Have we got anybody with any questions, Jason? I'm going to try and keep reminding myself to stop.
No, sir. And for those who maybe joined just a little bit late, on our side, the Q&A module doesn't seem to be working. You might be able to send us a question, but unfortunately, we will not be able to see it. So, as I mentioned at the start, if you do have a question, go ahead and email it to me, and we'll try to get to it. And even, if by chance it's after the webinar, we'll get to it. So I'm at jason.russell, that's Russell, at SQLSolutionsGroup.com. And again, apologize for this glitch, but we'll make it work this way if we have to. So back to you, Rich.
Cool. Perfect. Okay. So yeah, I don't think we need to keep talking about Management Studio 21 for the rest of this, but it's good fun to play with. It's a new toy. Okay. Azure Managed Instance. So they've announced a bunch of things on here. The bidirectional disaster recovery was very interesting. It's basically uses a distributed availability group under the scenes, and connects an on-prem or an elsewhere version of SQL Server 22, and you can create an availability group with a managed instance and use that as a secondary or as another node in your availability group. They even have an option in managed instance to say this is just a DR site. This isn't I'm not going to use this as my production node unless we need it for DR. So that's interesting. It reminded me slightly of the stretch database idea that didn't really work, where you'd it was what was that, a 2012 feature where you could put your old stale data into the Azure cloud, into stretch database, and yeah, it would save you locally.
The problem is it was so expensive that it didn't save you any money, so people just didn't really use it.
Yeah, which is a shame. It was a good idea, but yeah, it wasn't cost effective. This reminds me a bit of that, and also taking advantage of the distributed availability group. And what, for anybody who doesn't know, what a classic DAG is you can make an availability group of availability groups. We've used it a number of times for migrations and upgrades, where you have your current availability group, let's say 2 nodes, and you have another availability group, which could be in the cloud, could be wherever, of let's say 2 nodes, and you basically you create the second availability group as effectively a second node in the distributed availability group, and then you can stream everything over, and it's a simple cutover when you actually press the button and go live. So it's interesting that they've used that technology to do this with a managed instance. It's very interesting. You need to be on 2022 at least on-prem if you have an on-prem server to use this, but that's not a huge surprise. I don't know if you've got any thoughts about the using managed instance as a secondary node for a DR solution.
Yeah, I mean, they introduced that with 2022. I think probably the biggest thing is bidirectional, right? Because it was a one-way trip, right? Like if you fail over from on-prem to managed instance, you couldn't come back easily. So, yeah,
I mean, it feels more like a classic AG, right?
Yeah, for customers, and we have some that are we want to be all PaaS as much as we can, platform as a service, and not run infrastructure in Azure and have to manage VMs and patching and things like that. I think the more they do with managed instance, the better, right? So yeah.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, cool. I'm not sure how many people would use this, but it's a very good option to have. Most people, if they're using on-prem availability groups, will just use another data center, or if they're in AWS, for example, they'll just use another region as a DR. But yeah, it's definitely interesting from on-prem to managed instance. Okay. Another few things they've released for managed instance specifically is a next generation tier. So they've increased the database maximum to 500, sorry. More cores, more memory, more maximum storage. And one thing that is very interesting, it's something you've been able to do in AWS for a while, but not Azure, is to control your IOPS separately from compute. The classic way that they both used to do this was the larger your instance size, the more IOPS you got for your disks. AWS introduced that with the GP3 disks. GP2 was dependent on the size of the disk. GP3 is independent now, and they've introduced that in managed instance as well, the ability to ramp up your disk speed or turn it down, regardless of your instance size, which is definitely handy. Okay, so that's managed instance. Azure SQL DB, we're going back to AI, so you've got native vector support now. You can do AI programming in SQL Server now. And then they've done some hyperscale stuff. Hyperscale elastic pools is now general availability, which is nice. Increase the maximum database size and the transaction log maximum speed is much higher, which can be some people's bottlenecks. And they've basically improved the performance of failovers in hyperscale. So nobody's going to complain at those. You're likely only to use the maximum limits if you're in a large environment. But it's good to know that they're continuously working. I'm not sure how much, and I don't know if you have an opinion on these ones, Randy, but how many people will take advantage of those middle two. But the hyperscale elastic pools is going to be interesting.
Yeah, I think elastic pools. I think I can think of one customer or actually two, that we've dealt with on SQL DB, very, very high volume, that the transaction log rate will probably make a difference too. So
Yeah.
But those are definitely edge cases, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it will be useful if you need to use it. Absolutely. Cool. And the last part of this section is serverless. So it's always had an auto pause feature, and serverless is basically you only pay when you're using the server. The risk is the idea is it's for development servers and stuff like that. You log in and it starts up the server, you use it, and then you shut it down. And then you don't pay for it when it's shut down. It used to have an option where you could auto shut it down if it went inactive for at least an hour. They've changed that to at least 15 minutes now. So you can make sure you're not getting charged for hour when you're not using it every time you log on, if you forget to shut it down. It's not much of a performance enhancement, but it's good for your pocket. So let's get on to the next one, SQL Server 2025. Just checking, Jason, before we start talking this one, have we got anything else? Any other questions come in?
Do not see any.
Okay, cool. So let's go through this, and then we'll talk if there's anything else interesting that we discovered at PASS. SQL Server 2025. Like we mentioned at the beginning, they've gone Microsoft were very AI this year. So some of the features of 2025 is the native vector type, so making it much more AI approachable. You can use T-SQL to contact some cloud services like Azure OpenAI, Alarm Kserve. The text chunking they've built a lot of AI stuff into the T-SQL language. Unfortunately, I can't show you some examples of this because it's not in public preview yet at SQL Server 2025. But maybe when it is, we can do another another webinar to take you through 2025 and the new fun stuff. Yeah, I mean, I can read this all to you, but it's a lot of AI integration, a lot of T-SQL features for AI, which will be great if you use AI, and for people like data scientists perhaps, or people who are into data modeling, then maybe using the AI features would be extremely useful for you. I'm not sure I'm going to use them too much as a consultant, but that's because I'm not often working on my own servers. I'm working on clients. Okay. Some more things they've done. More integration with Fabric. I'm sure you're all aware, but Fabric is the new reporting suite for SQL Server, for want of a better word. Kind of the new that they did SSRS, and they've kind of rolled Power BI into Fabric a little. It's kind of the reporting side of SQL Server. It's now called Fabric. They've got mirroring to that now, where you can offload workloads to Fabric, like you reporting workloads. Instead of doing it locally, you can send it to Fabric to do if you'd like to. Another thing, a completely separate subject. It was just I didn't want to put 2 lines on one slide. Was security. There's just additional security options when you're doing backups to Azure, which is very much a nice to have and a requirement in some environments. So I can see why
that's definitely one that I think is good. We have several customers that are in Azure that we back up natively to blob storage, and the user experience is you have to have a SAS token for your storage account, and then you have to create a credential for that SAS token in order for SQL Server to have permissions to write the backups, right? And then of course SAS tokens expire, and you just got to deal with managing all that. And so this managed identity support will make it so that you can just say, hey, this is the managed identity for this SQL Server, give it permissions to the storage account, and you're done, right? So that definitely streamlines that. And then, I mean, I think the inbound connections, right? I mean, that's important too, right? In terms of Azure services connecting to on-prem SQL Server version, right? Because just more kind of intra integration. One of the things that I have seen that I think Microsoft is they like to really push you in a direction, right? Until they finally get the message that direction doesn't work for everybody, right? So Entra, replacing Active Directory has been that direction for a long time, right? And I think we're seeing things that Microsoft is saying, okay, yeah, Active Directory is not going away, on-prem's not going away, and so we need to natively support both in a more integrated fashion, right? So, we're seeing Active Directory integration and authentication for managed instance, for example, right? That's a really big deal, right? Because, Entra authentication is a web service call, right? So when you go to authenticate to Entra to log into Azure SQL DB, MI, whatever, that's going to take, 600-700 milliseconds probably, compared to Active Directory, which can be, a millisecond, right? Like it's Kerberos, it's sitting right there in the same data center and so forth. And so we've seen things where people, hey, we're migrating from on-prem to managed instance and weren't using connection pooling correctly. And so, their applications are authenticating over and over and over again, and you can get away with that in Active Directory and you can't with Entra, right? So that's in that direction. But then now here we're also saying, hey, here's on-prem SQL Server with some Entra integration, right? In this case, managed identity. So I think I've said for ever since it became a buzzword, to a large degree with some very, very few exceptions when it comes to the cloud, everybody is going to be hybrid, right?
Yeah.
pure cloud or nothing cloud that's going to be very, very few businesses, right? And so I think just, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but from this point that you have here on the slide, but I just think that supporting hybrid, seeing those kinds of things like Entra and Active Directory coming closer together, um, are positive things that we're seeing. So
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I do appreciate when they don't try and push us that hard in one direction. They'll support, yeah, like you say, the hybrid approach.
yeah.
Cool. All right. Next slide is going to be my favorite slide of the whole presentation, is the new T-SQL features. The first bullet point is one of my least favorite bullet points on the whole slide. So we've had XML data type and XML functions for a while. We've had some JSON functions for a while, as well as some that have been released in 2022. In fact, they might all be 2022. I'd have to go and check. But now we've actually got a JSON data type. And what this is, it's I'm not enthused about JSON as a data type or JSON data at all in a database. The same way I'm not particularly encouraged by seeing XML data in a database. And the reason for that is because it doesn't perform well historically. It's usually a sticking plaster for actually designing a data table properly, and you're removing the relational part of a relational database in one man's opinion. But if it's in use, people use it. I understand it's out there, and we see it a fair amount with XML specifically. We see less JSON. But the fact that it's getting a data type and you can index it and you can use proper JSON functions at SQL Server will, whilst it may push more people to use it, it will make it more manageable when it is in use, hopefully. So yeah, that's something I'm going to be investigating quite a lot. I don't know, what's your opinion of non-relational data in a database, Randy? Do you agree with me, or
I think it's fine to store it, right? It definitely meets a need that, we don't want to have to go change a database schema every time we add something to, this thing that we need to store. So I don't have a problem in general with storing non-structured data in a relational database. The problem is that people then turn that into, hey, I don't need a relational data model. I'm just going to shove everything in here and I'm going to query it and I'm going to shred the XML. I'm going to use the JSON functions to do all this. And we've had those, we'll call them discussions with developers at some of our customers, right? And so I hear you on that it's the proverbial slippery slope. It was interesting because when they introduced the JSON expressions and they didn't create a data type and indexes like they did for XML, I thought that was kind of interesting. So this doesn't surprise me. And again, it will be just like XML. I mean, at least JSON's not as verbose as XML, right? So it's not as big, but I think there will be places where storing some JSON data in the database, properly indexed and using that in this particular use case is going to be fine. I also think it will be abused like crazy, right? So
agreed.
It's
and it's so tempting for a developer. You start with just storing XML JSON, and then it's I want to search that data type for X value, which and often the indexing is overlooked.
Well, one of the things we also see is that we're storing massive amounts of XML or JSON in the database and then returning all of it to the client in order to use one tiny little thing, right? And so, we see customers with async network IO waits and things because of that. So if this encourages people to hey, index it and just grab what you need in your query, that can be a good thing too. So it's like everything else, right? Every technology can be used for good or evil, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think I might be a little jaded because people don't call us in when they're having a good time with their databases. They call
that
us
is
in when there's a
true.
problem.
That is true.
So yeah, we may be a little biased.
Yep.
Okay. I mean, GraphQL support, um, great if you're going to use it. I imagine most people won't. Regex support is interesting for anybody that can write the absolute wizardry that is regex. This will be very useful. I would assume that's a very small percentage of the developer population that can understand regular expressions, but yeah, when necessary, they're very powerful. And for anybody that doesn't, I imagine everybody knows, but so regular expressions is what's the definition? It's a good way of describing them. It's a way of like searching for occurrences of strings or values and yeah, it basically looks just like hieroglyphics and returns some amazing results if you can get it to work. Like
It
I've
is,
got a couple of friends who are amazing at it, and it's
yeah,
I've got no
regex
idea.
is complex, right? But they're
Yeah.
powerful, right? So it's when you look at, some of the from within T-SQL, some of the combination of string functions and things that people will put together to pull something out of a text, of a string based column. This is going to be really useful, right? Because it's regex. You can do things like, here's this giant text field, and I want to find the occurrence of this word on every other line if it's followed by a colon, but not. I mean, the things that you can do with regex are pretty powerful. So
Yeah.
if
I'm
you
just
think about like all the things you've had to do with char index and reverse and substring this and then do it again, like to put this whole thing together with the T-SQL string functions, being able to, figure that out in regex is, I think, going to be pretty cool. So,
I've just brought up the Wikipedia page for regular expressions, and you get nonsense like that's a regular expression. Like you can set a string starting with a, then zero or more. Like it's chaos, but it's amazingly powerful.
yeah.
Um, yeah, it's pure wizardry. I'm still certain of it,
Do,
but
do, do you know who's really good at regex?
oh, go on. You're gonna drop somebody in
Chat
it.
GPT.
Good
I use
shout.
it
Yeah,
all the time. You know,
yeah.
given the string blah, find this for me using a regular expression, and it will get pretty darn close.
Hmm. Yeah.
So,
I tell you what, I used ChatGPT the other day for I wanted to know how I could get some information via an API, and I was like, how do I do this? And it just full instructions and commands and
yep,
stuff. It's so good.
yep.
Whether or not it's correct, I don't know yet. But
Well, that's
yeah,
the issue, right? It's a force multiplier in terms of doing stuff like that for you, but you have to be smart enough to not just
not
compile
just
what it
run it.
said and go, right? So,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cool. And REST API support. You can call external endpoints. Again, quite a niche thing to want to do. Um, I remember once, I remember a demo I did years ago, where you could query the API for Reddit, the news, or the website Reddit. You all know what that is, and that was an absolute pain. It was a very interesting experiment, but yeah, you could pull data directly out of Reddit using the API, but I imagine it'll be a lot simpler now.
I think
With
this is actually, I think both this and GraphQL are huge, honestly.
yeah,
Because integration is such a big thing now. and everybody's building RESTful APIs into their products, and we have developers that really just want to do everything inside the database, right? So we're doing things like link servers to this, to that, to whatever, to accomplish the same thing. I think, being able just to call a REST API from a stored procedure, get JSON back, parse that JSON using the JSON expressions, and you have your data in your database is going to be really powerful.
Yeah. I mean, one of the experiments I've wanted to do for a while, and this is just because I have to always have a non-word project going on, is to pull data out of our timesheeting application that we use. And then I can create like a little board here that will tell me how I'm doing to keep me on track. Do you know what I mean? And yeah, that was going to be a pain, but maybe using this might make that simpler. We'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does open up a lot of integration options. You're right.
Yeah.
Cool. And then yeah, so some changes to the transaction log in SQL Server 2025 for Azure and Kafka. Okay, I've lost the slide presenter view. There we go. Okay, so that's T-SQL. Some mission critical stuff. They've done some big changes with optimized locking, so isolation levels, which will be interesting to dig into. That'll be huge. For those of you that don't know, it's the isolation level within SQL Server. The default one is classically called pessimistic locking, whereby if somebody's reading or writing some data, then no other processors can access that data. Unless you force something like no lock, which people do all the time, which is, don't get me started. I can rant about that for the next 45 minutes. But they bringing in some more changes to the optimized locking levels, which should make blocking less of an issue. What exactly that means, again, we don't have our hands on SQL Server 2025 yet to be able to test it. But I'm looking forward to that specifically.
So on that note, a lot of new features they put into the on-prem product, they put into Azure SQL DB first. So Azure SQL DB has the optimized locking that we're talking about here, and there's a lot of good documentation on that. So if you don't have access to the private preview, you can still kind of get an understanding of some of these features just looking at, hey, is this in Azure already? So
that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting since they brought out Azure that they test a lot of stuff in Azure first, right, before pushing it to on-prem.
Yep.
Because they can get instant feedback and stuff.
Yep.
So yeah, a few more of the improvements. Improvements on batch mode, which would be nice for the performance for things like ETL processors. Improvements in column store. What column store is a different way of compressing data. It's not traditionally data is stored as row data, and you compress rows. Column store is turning that 90 degrees and compressing columns. It's great for like data warehousing and things like that. And they've made some improvements in that. Just general query processing. So the optimizer, they've got what I imagine this is referring to is the adaptive query processing, which is an Azure feature where when execution plan's created, it will work out how it's going to join two tables. Let's say it chooses a loop join. Whilst that's executing, if it runs longer than it estimates, so let's say it's assuming it's going to do 100 loops. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it gets over the 100 and keeps going and goes, oh, actually, this is more data than I assumed. I'm going to change to a hash match. Then in an execution plan, it would show as an adaptive join. And what that means is it's changed its mind halfway through and has changed from a loop to a hash match in that scenario. So that's very interesting. Whether that's making its way to on-prem, I imagine that's what that is. But yeah, it's interesting. It makes query tuning fun when you see adaptive joins, and yeah, you have to go digging. But Yeah, I'm glad they've introduced this sort of thing because yeah, having loop joins if you're not doing enough statistics maintenance, for example, and it's your SQL server making bad choices, then the idea is that the adaptive joins help with that. And then yeah, accelerated query execution. It's just they're trying to make it smarter and better executing queries. And then yeah, another thing is the enhanced reliability and AG failovers. Just make them go a bit smoother because you can if you're failing over manually, it may be because you've got a problem, and sometimes that can take a while. So just enhance enhance the process there. That's pretty much everything. I'm going to skip past that slide. Have we got any more questions waiting, Jason?
No, nothing at this time.
I say any more, like there's been other ones. Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of push of AI at Summit. There was a lot of cool presentations there, a lot of cool people, a lot of people to meet, which was nice. Was there anything else stand out for you at Summit, Randy, that you felt
So
from this year
I think, like I said, I was there for a day. So I think the thing that I was struck with, I guess, having been attending summits since almost since they began, it has gotten much smaller, frankly, right? It's much smaller. And that has pros and cons, right? I definitely feel like, from a pro standpoint, like it was more contained in kind of that one smaller building area. It was, not as crowded in terms of, sessions with lines out the door and to get in for, for example, I went to Bob Ward's session on the transaction log, and Bob Ward is one that typically, his sessions were standing room only, right? And that wasn't the case this time, right? So, in terms of just running into people, right, in the community zone, things like that. So, so it had a little bit more of it was just a smaller feel like that. I think, I guess on the con side of that, I did find the uh, Microsoft decision to, announce SQL Server 2025 at Ignite instead of Summit interesting. Because you're talking to a guy, I think it was, I can't remember what year, but hopefully this isn't Mandela effect, but
Sure.
I recall a summit that at the keynote, the Microsoft keynote, everybody got a copy. This is when things came out on CD or DVD, right? Of I want to say it was Yukon SQL Server 2005, um, in a box signed by the development team. Right. Like, so my point being that announcing the new version of SQL Server at Summit was a big deal to Microsoft. So it's, the past organization, went bankrupt. Redgate had to acquire the assets. And so there's definitely been some changes in Summit. So
Yeah.
I think that, that decision and just, it seemed like there was just less Microsoft involvement at Summit this time. Is that, it's becoming a little bit different, but, what's the saying? The only thing constant is change, right? So,
Yeah.
Rich probably got tired of hearing from me those days that I was there in town with him. It was almost like back in my day, back in my day, Summit was like this. We had this, we have this. This was different, and being his first time, that was probably not that productive for me to be sick. Keep saying that,
It's
but
definitely interesting though.
yeah,
I was
yeah.
chatting to quite a few people there, and there was there was the general feeling that Microsoft just amongst other things sent a lot less people
Mhm.
to pass versus previous times.
What's
Um,
interesting about that particular thing is that that's the reason Past Summit has been in Seattle mostly so often. is because the idea was that Microsoft would send a lot more people, right? Because they're here, right?
Yeah.
And having to send people to Orlando or Vegas or wherever and, travel and hotels and everything, Microsoft just wasn't going to send as many people. So, um, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Redgate does with that in the future. I know we're coming back to Seattle next year.
Mhm.
But I guess on a plus side of that, maybe that's been one of the complaints for people from the eastern part of the country or even internationally, that like, why do we have to go to Seattle every time, right?
Well,
So
when you say that, they're doing 3 satellite events next year,
mhm,
aren't they?
yep,
In October.
yep,
Um, I know one's in Amsterdam. I want to say one's in Texas.
yep. That's
I
going to
can't
be
remember whether.
interesting too, because Pass years ago did something called Sequel Rally. They only did it for a couple of years, and it was kind of a mid-year, smaller summit. And I think I spoke at that on the first one, but it only lasted for a couple of years.
Mhm.
So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if these are more like that. And that was kind of like my experience for SQL Rally was that it was kind of in between like a SQL Saturday and Summit in terms of size, right? And so
Yeah.
we'll see what these look like, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
it'll be interesting for sure. They'll obviously be smaller than Pass, but it'll be interesting to see how
yep,
big they are, whether they're the
yeah,
equivalent to a Sequel Saturday. Um, but yeah,
yeah.
they haven't announced dates for these yet.
I mean,
Yeah,
and SQL Saturday varies too, right? I
it
you
does.
know,
Yeah.
I would say the typical SQL Saturday is probably what 100 people or something. That's been my experience. It varies, right? Some are more, some are less, but
Yeah.
there's a
I've been to
couple of
some
them that
UK
I
ones,
went.
they tend to be bigger.
Yeah, there's a couple that I went to that were like 500, 900 people, and then that becomes almost like a conference, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. You know.
Hmm.
Rich, we have a customer in Amsterdam, so that might be an
Yeah, we'll go
excuse
and
for
say
us to
hi.
go to that one, or at least to send you. It's probably
Yeah.
tougher to justify me going to Amsterdam, but you know,
I've been
as
to Amsterdam once, and
as
it was
we
during lockdown. It
as
was
we
good
often
times.
talk about, Rich going places like that is kind of like me going to a couple states over. So, you know.
Yeah, I'll go to a different country. Yeah. I know there's a ferry that I can get on, which is about 2 hours drive from me. I can get on a ferry that's an overnight
Exactly.
straight there. Like
Yeah.
it's so close.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, yeah. We'll have to see what the announcement happens, and I'll probably end up volunteering to speak there. We'll see what happens with that.
yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
Great.
it'd be interesting.
Well, thanks everyone. This we kind of do this webinar each year, and it's always kind of an interesting one because it's just kind of like, hey, this is some of the stuff from Summit if you weren't there. Um, some people like it, some people don't care. It tends to be a little bit lower attendance. I think we've got what 15 attendees or something this time, so which is fine, you know. But yeah, hopefully it had some value, Rich. Thanks for putting this together. And
Sure.
you all know where to find us if you need anything.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Randy. Thank you for joining as well. And it was good to meet you and meet a lot of the community at the at Summit. It was good fun.
Such a strange world we live in now, right? Because it was actually, Rich and I have worked together for what, two years
Two
plus
years.
now,
Well, my
and
my my first day at SSG was remote during Past Summit 22, wasn't it?
that is correct. That is
Yeah, so
correct.
it was two
Yeah.
years.
And
Hmm.
so, and it was funny because like, I picked him up at the hotel on Sunday to go, do some tourist stuff and it was like, hey, nice to meet you, right? But it's
Yeah. Yeah, we
but
speak every
it's
day, but we've never met.
someone that I
Yeah.
feel like I know really well, So it's funny world that we live in these days. But Yeah, Rich, I
Yeah.
guess the question I asked you, your first time speaking at Summit, how was that experience? You had
It
two
was great
sessions. I
fun.
didn't get to go and heckle you, but um, you know.
Oh, it was so there's some rules, isn't there, for presenting. It's never
Mhm.
write demos on stage. Is one of them. And my first presentation was the Thursday morning. It was kilt day, so I was wearing a kilt, which is instantly off-putting for everybody involved. Um, and it was the new T-SQL features, but there was things like the new T-SQL features in 2022, and there was things like generate series. Long story short, it was a very full room. Um, and I asked everybody to get input, and they were asking questions that, like for the generate series function, what if you put in negative numbers? What if you start negative, put a positive, and like, can you overflow? Long story short, we rewrote all the demos in the presentation on stage. Like people would ask a question, be like, "Well, let's test," and yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed that. Um, the second presentation I had was column store enhancements in 2022. What was slightly off-putting there was I was being asked some extremely under the covers, behind the scenes questions about how column store works. And it turns out that the people who work for Microsoft, specifically on the column store team, were in the audience asking questions that they damn well knew the answers to. Um, and I like, did you know, for example, that? Oh, hang on, I wrote it down here. We had a chat afterwards, and I wrote down some notes. Um, where's my folder? Did you know that once, if you insert into column store, once you hit 102,400 rows or higher, it minimally logs the data and it goes fast. If you insert 102,399 or lower, it doesn't and performs terribly. Like, come on. They were asking me what that threshold was. I don't know. Um, but yeah, I think that may have been a different in expectations between what the presentation was about. It wasn't about this is how column store works. It was these are the new features of column store. But
Right,
yeah,
right.
um, but yeah, it was still fun. We were messing about on stage
I
and
I have found that particularly like the bigger the conference it is that you're speaking at,
mhm.
the more of that you'll get, just because at SQL Saturdays, user groups, things like that, you just have a lot of people who just want to learn, right?
Sure. Mhm.
And a lot of the people that, are able to have their company, spend, what, 5 grand or whatever by the time you look at the conference ticket and travel and everything to send them, tend to be really senior people, right? And so that's definitely been my experience that, you have people who are looking for a lot more in depth. And then you also have people, you can get this in any crowd, but who, they want to show that they're smarter than you, right?
Yeah, they know the answers. Yeah, yeah.
And it's, whatever, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
If that's how you build your self-worth, more power to you,
exactly.
Because
Yeah,
guess
I think
what?
that.
There's
Yeah.
always someone smarter than you.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I think that's why the T-SQL one went so well. It was people who wanted to be able to use. It was a lot of developers
Yep,
in that room,
yep.
which I've worked with a lot of developers, and there's no
I
right or
did
wrong. There was.
multiple, I think we're out of time, but multiple years I did a very similar session, not exactly the same, on isolation levels
Mhm.
at Summit. And it was always that way, right? That
Yeah.
it was a mix, right? There were people that like actually had no clue how this works, what these mean, and just wanted to learn. But there were people who were like, wanted to get really esoteric and serializable versus this versus that and how it works and
Yeah.
thresholds and which is fine, but yeah.
Yeah, I think one of my I always have a few questions at the beginning of a session, like put your hands up if you're a developer, if you're a DBA, if you're
Mhm.
a. I think one of my questions is going to be, do you work for Microsoft?
Yeah.
Because you don't get to ask questions. But yeah, no, it was good. It was a good experience. Everybody was lovely and friendly. There's a lot of faces I just didn't know because I know a lot of people who were either based in Europe or the more the more the more the people in the US who blog more or are more active on the SQL Server Slack
community
or,
involvement, right? Yeah,
that's it. So there was a lot of presentations there of people that I'd never heard of.
yep.
And I went to a couple and they were fascinating. But yeah, it was good to put a lot of names to faces and do the community events. That was good. It was it was fun to meet some people, including yourself, right?
Likewise.
Likewise. It was good fun. Thank you. I do see we're at time, so we won't keep you too much longer. Shall I hand it back to you, Jason?
Yes, thanks, Rich. I will take it. Appreciate your time, and Randy, speaking of two guys smarter than me. So once again, apologize for the Q&A glitch. We will ensure that's working for our next webinar, which, by the way, we anticipate to be in February, we think. We'll be sharing news about that probably in the next couple weeks, so you can start planning for that next one. Always eager to share SQL Server knowledge with our audience. Appreciate all of you being here today. And until next time, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.